Crows are watching you. I don't mean that loosely. I mean right now. If a crow has seen your face before, it has a file on you. And I want to explain exactly what that means. Because when I actually dug into this, I realized how much we've been underestimating these birds for a very long time. Let me start with the basic thing first. Crows follow people. Wherever humans build towns, crows show up nearby. Gas stations, parking lots, downtown streets, residential fences. We always knew they were around. What we didn't know until recently is how much attention they were actually paying. The way I understand it, we assumed they were just background animals, hanging around for scraps, not really focused on us specifically. That assumption was wrong. Here's what changed. Researchers built up a massive archive of crow calls, thousands of hours of recordings. Then they fed all of it into a machine learning system. The plan was simple. Teach the AI to sort calls into basic groups. Food nearby. Danger nearby. That kind of thing. Nobody expected anything unusual. They thought they'd get organized folders of bird noise. That is not what happened. The system didn't just sort the calls. It started finding structure inside them that nobody planned for. The output didn't look like neat categories. It looked like something struggling to keep up with a signal too complex for its labels. What the researchers were actually looking at, though none of them wanted to say it immediately, was something that looked like grammar. And I think that's the part worth slowing down on. Grammar isn't fancy words. Grammar is the invisible rule system underneath language. It's what makes the dog chased the ball mean something clear, while ball that chased dog thee means nothing at all. For over 100 years, scientists assumed animal sounds had no such structure underneath. A dog barking was just emotion leaking out. A bird calling was just a reaction to something nearby. No deeper pattern, no rules, just noise with feeling attached. But the model wasn't detecting raw emotion. It was detecting rules, consistent ones, rules that held up across different birds, different locations, different times of day. To me, that's the moment this whole topic shifted from interesting to genuinely important. Once the researchers accepted what the model was showing them, they had to go back and re-examine everything they'd already recorded. Recordings that had been filed away as background noise suddenly needed a completely different question asked of them. Not what does this sound mean emotionally, but what structure is holding this sound together. That shift in the question is what cracked everything open. Now here's where it gets personal. During the recordings, a man wearing a distinctive red hat walked through the park where the microphones were set up. A crow made a call. To any human listening, it would have blended into the general flock noise. But the AI flagged something different. A specific pitch, a specific rhythm, tiny gaps between notes that the system treated not as a reaction, but as a label, like a name. 3 days later, the same man walked through. The same crow made the exact same distinctive call. On its own, that's not shocking. Animals recognize familiar individuals. Dogs do it. Cats do it. This still felt like something we already knew, Then it stopped fitting what we already knew. A week after that, a completely different crow, one that had never seen the man before, produced the identical call the moment he came into view. That crow had never met him, but it already had his label. The sound had been passed from one bird to another like information. According to the analysis, that specific vocal pattern was never used for any other person across the entire set of recordings. It functioned exactly like a proper noun, a name. Think about what has to happen for that to work. One crow has to take a set of visual details, the shape of a face, a red hat, the way a person moves, and encode all of that into sound. That sound then has to be transmitted to a second crow that never saw the original person. The second crow has to store it correctly and retrieve the exact label at the right moment, days later, with no prompting. That is not mimicry. That is the transfer of a concept from one mind to another, which is, when you strip everything else away, a working definition of language. And I think the depth goes further than just labeling people. Some of the recorded exchanges weren't reactions to anything happening in real time. Groups of crows gathered and produced long layered sequences of sound that the model classified as anticipatory, not responsive. In plain terms, they weren't describing what was happening. They were discussing what to do about something before it happened. And a large share of that communication, by the model's estimate, was about humans specifically. Not squirrels, not hawks, not each other, us. The system even detected different emotional tones attached to different human-related labels. A distinct signal existed for a person carrying a stick, a completely separate one for a person carrying food. Now, the obvious question is, how can a bird do this? The brain of a crow fits in your palm. The skull is smaller than your fist. For decades, scientists looked at that small, smooth brain and quietly concluded there wasn't much going on inside. That conclusion came from looking for the wrong thing. We assumed intelligence lived in the cerebral cortex, the thick, wrinkled outer layer of a mammal's brain. Birds don't have one, so we assumed birds were working with a much simpler system. That was a mistake. Birds evolved a completely different structure called the pallium. It doesn't look like a mammal cortex, but under a microscope, the neurons are packed together with almost extreme density. Ounce for ounce, a crow's brain rivals a chimpanzee's in raw processing power. Researchers now regularly describe corvids as feathered primates. The way I think about it, two completely separate evolutionary paths solved the same problem using completely different designs and arrived at roughly the same result. One built a large layered brain. The other compressed the same computing power into something light enough to fly with. We spent a century judging bird intelligence by the shape of the container. We should have been measuring what was packed inside it. New Caledonian crows are probably the clearest example of this. These birds manufacture tools before using them. There is a plant with long, rigid leaves. Researchers have filmed these crows landing on it, cutting into the leaf, and tearing it into a specific stepped, hooked shape. They're making a barbed probe designed to pull insects out of tight spaces. That's not accidental. That's a mental plan being carried out. When the tool breaks, they repair it. When the right plant isn't available, they improvise with wire, bark, or scrap material. There's also the water test. Scientists placed a narrow tube of water in front of a crow, with a treat floating just out of reach. Nearby were two piles, heavy stones and lightweight foam. A creature running on pure instinct might just dump everything in. The crow didn't. It paused, studied both piles, and selected only the heavy stones, dropping them in one at a time, while completely ignoring the foam. It understood, without being taught, that density affects water level, and that the foam would do nothing useful. It solved a problem that genuinely stumps young children. Confirmed research at Oxford and other institutions documented this behavior repeatedly across multiple trials. In a separate test, crows faced a puzzle box where food required pressing a lever hidden behind an obstacle. They worked out that a stick could trigger a hidden mechanism, which would then activate the lever they actually needed. That's not trial and error. That's building a mental model of hidden machinery just by watching how pieces move. To me, that's the part that makes the language findings less surprising. The hardware for complex communication was always there. We just weren't looking for it in the right place. Now here's the part that stops being about clever birds and becomes personal. Cross a crow, and the situation does not resolve itself quietly. In 2006, a wildlife biologist at the University of Washington wanted to test whether crows could recognize individual human faces. Reasonably worried about becoming a permanent target himself, he wore a rubber caveman mask while catching and banding a small group of crows for a routine research project. The birds weren't hurt, just tagged and released. But they did not take it well. Once the mask came off, he went back to being an ordinary person to the crows around him. He also tested a second mask, a completely neutral face, and wore that one around campus too. The crows ignored it entirely. But the moment the caveman mask reappeared, the birds erupted, scolding, diving at the wearer, following them across the grounds. Other researchers on the team wore the same mask and received the same reaction. So it was genuinely the face triggering the response, not anything else about the person underneath. What happened next is the part I find hard to shake. The number of angry crows kept growing week after week. 7 became 20. 20 became 40. Many of these new attackers had never been anywhere near the original incident. Some hadn't even hatched yet when it happened. 5 years after the initial experiment, the same mask still triggered attacks on that campus. Nearly every bird originally caught was probably dead by that point. The threat had been inherited, passed on to birds who never personally witnessed anything. The researchers published this, and it confirmed something the acoustic analysis had already suggested. These birds weren't just remembering a face themselves. They were describing it, passing the details to birds who had never seen it, and distributing a warning through the population. The marker sequence assigned to the man in the red hat and the mask study are essentially the same phenomenon. One acoustic, one visual. What this means practically is that crows maintain a facial recognition system that is built from actual features: the spacing of your eyes, the shape of your nose, the particular way you carry yourself, and it's precise. If you feed crows every morning while your neighbor throws rocks to scare them off, the flock learns the difference quickly. They'll land near you and reserve something considerably less friendly for the person next door. And the acoustic data suggests that once a person enters an area, the alert spreads almost instantly through the local population. You can change your jacket. You can grow a beard. Your face stays the same. And that's the one thing they're actually tracking. The social structure underneath all of this goes even deeper. When a crow dies, the flock doesn't just scatter. A bird finds the body and gives a specific call. Other crows gather into nearby branches and go quiet. They don't feed on the body. They don't chase whatever might be nearby. They observe. For years, people assumed this was grief, and maybe some version of that is happening. But the acoustic modeling points towards something more specific. The gathered birds appear to be assessing the scene. What happened here? Was it a predator? A car? A person with a weapon? And that assessment gets encoded into low-frequency calls that spread outward to the broader community. The way I think about it, this isn't just mourning. It's a death record with a cause attached. Every death becomes information the flock can act on. Which road to avoid? Which type of figure in the sky means danger? The knowledge survives long after the individual bird is gone, and research confirmed that crows can distinguish between a person holding an umbrella and a person holding a weapon. They can tell a hunter scanning the treetops from a hiker watching a trail. Their alarm signals for each are completely different. They appear to be reading intent, not just detecting objects. And they react before you've even finished raising your arm. There's a gentler side, too. People who consistently feed crows often find small objects left behind afterward. A bottle cap, a bit of colored glass, an occasional coin. The vocal patterns around these favored humans register as structurally softer and higher in pitch than the alert signals. Something that reads, at least in terms of structure, like positive association. It looks like a basic economy of exchange: food given, loyalty returned, an informal agreement between two species that supposedly share no common language. Put all of this together, and what you actually have is not just a clever animal. You have a social system with memory, enforcement, mourning procedures, threat assessment, and trade. A parallel social structure operating on top of our own, with its own history, its own rules, and its own running record of individual humans by name. Then there's the information network question. Researchers mapped crow calls across huge distances and found that specific calls travel between flocks across hundreds of miles with no direct physical contact required. A new alarm call for an unfamiliar threat surfaces in one city, and months later, the same distinct pattern appears in a different region entirely. It spreads the way. Information spreads online, from node to node, faster than the original threat can travel. The current theory is that crows maintain something like a shared oral knowledge base. Nobody starts from zero. Each generation inherits what the last one figured out. Some scientists suggest this qualifies as culture in the strict sense, a body of shared knowledge that outlives any single member and keeps updating itself. We reserved that word for humans for a very long time. The data doesn't seem to care what we reserved it for. And then, right at the end of the study, something unexpected happened. For months, the model had been working smoothly, mapping calls, flagging labels, identifying what looked like grammar and emotional tone. Then, the pattern broke. In the final stretch of recordings, the call shifted in a way nobody had documented before. A strange rhythmic structure appeared inside the vocalizations that didn't match any known regional variation. It wasn't a new accent. It looked like a structural change in the system itself, and it spread outward from flock to flock at the same speed as ordinary calls. The model's confidence scores collapsed as it tried to keep up. It stopped decoding meaning. It was just capturing noise it couldn't read. Nobody has cracked what it means yet. The system is still processing. But some behavioral scientists have offered an explanation that's difficult to dismiss entirely. The crows noticed. They noticed the microphones placed in the bark. They noticed the equipment catching light in the foliage. More specifically, they noticed that the humans nearby had stopped behaving the way humans normally behave. Instead of chasing them off, these humans went still and kept watching without reacting. Crows are confirmed to test boundaries regularly. They drop objects in front of moving cars to observe what happens. They provoke other animals to gauge reactions. This time, instead of getting a normal response, the humans just kept watching and recording. It's reasonable to consider whether the birds concluded they had become the focus of something rather than just bystanders. If that's true, the shift in calls wasn't random noise. It was a change in the signal itself. Deliberate interference. A move to a frequency the equipment couldn't follow. Now, skeptics on the research team pushed back on this, and it's worth saying clearly. A shift in vocal pattern doesn't have to mean intentional concealment. It could be a seasonal change. The study didn't run long enough to capture. It could be a generational shift from an unusually large group of young birds entering the population at once. Nobody on the team rules that out, but nobody rules out the other explanation either. And that unresolved gap is what makes this so hard to close. If the encryption theory holds, the silence coming out of the trees right now isn't absence of communication. It's communication that moved to a channel we can't hear yet. Whatever the equipment is still picking up is probably cover noise laid over a real signal passing through some other method nobody has thought to look for yet. What I take from all of this is that we have spent a very long time looking at crows and seeing a background nuisance. What the data is showing is something else entirely. An animal with a brain, built for complex processing, a social system with real structure, a memory that spans generations, a labeling system that includes individual human faces, and possibly an awareness that it was being studied and a decision to stop cooperating. The confirmed parts of this are solid. The facial recognition studies are published and replicated. The tool use is documented across multiple institutions. The social mourning behavior is confirmed observational fact. The acoustic grammar findings are newer and carry the tag of current research, still being reviewed and processed. The encryption theory is speculation, but it's the kind of speculation that comes from researchers who already know how much they underestimated this animal once before. So for me, the main thing I understand now is this. Crows are not background animals. They are active observers who have been building information files on individual humans, passing those files between generations, organizing that information with something that functions like language, and doing all of this inside a social system we barely understood existed. We assumed we were the ones doing the watching. The data says that was never the whole picture. And if they really did change their signal once they realized we were listening, then the most important question isn't what they were saying before. It's what they're choosing to say now that they know we're paying attention.